Hey everyone, and welcome to Groove Builders, the show where we create together. I'm your host, Disorderly Cone, and in this episode, we're going to be starting the infamous Metal Earth armor collection, beginning with the horse armor. Now, I asked you Groove Builders at home what you thought about this build, and a lot of people told me it can be a little bit tricky with the back area because of all the unique forming and detail that we're working with. Groove Builders, will we experience the same issue? Let's find out together on the Workbench. Groove Builders, welcome to the Workbench. We have our horse armor and some pretty cool Metal Earth packaging. Look at that. Very neat. Let's go ahead and take a look at the back. On the back, we get a brief history of our horse armor, and then on the left-hand side, we get a look at some other models in the series. On the right-hand side here, we have a QR code which we can scan to get a 360 view of our model if we need it while we're building. And then at the very bottom here, we have a difficulty rating, and this one's saying about a medium, which, if you look at the front with all these little special bends here, that might be a pretty accurate description. Groovers, let's not waste any more time, let's go ahead and open up our package. We have our instructions, and we have our 2 sheets of metal. Very nice. And look at all that detail on the second sheet. Groovers, let's go ahead and get building. With our metal and tools in hand, we begin to cut out our first couple of pieces for our Metal Earth horse armor. Our first couple of steps have us forming the base for our horse armor with some rectangles, boxes, and of course, detail to add on to the base. Now for the most part, Groove Builders, I assume you've already built 1 or 2 builds before attempting this one here. But nevertheless, we should go ahead and take a look at the instructions anyway. R2? I know R2, I think these models look pretty cool too, and not to mention when they're all done, they're gonna look great inside of our hallways. No R2, I don't think C-3PO will be able to fit in any of them, and again, I know I'm supposed to build them and I will get to it, don't worry. I promise R2 will do them very soon, but can we just get the instructions? Thanks, bud. Starting at the top, we have that Metal Earth logo, followed by a good look at our horse armor. Just below that, we have a QR code which we can scan to get a 360 view of our model if we need it while we're building. I know personally I found this very useful when it came to forming all of our detail along the rump and of course along that mane. Just below and to the left, we have a picture of one of our parts. Here we get a glimpse at what our insertion holes, insertion tabs, and fold lines look like. It's very important that we fold all of our pieces along the fold lines, and of course insert all of our tabs into the appropriate insertion holes. Once we have our tabs in the holes, we need to secure them in a special way, usually indicated by a circle and triangle, but more on them in a minute. Before moving on, I really recommend having a good understanding of this picture and what everything means, as these are the basics of metal model building. Now moving on, we have our Almighty Legend. And this, of course, is where we find a lot of our symbols scattered throughout our instructions. The first 2, the engraved and non-engraved symbols, are typically found around our highly detailed pieces. It's very important to make sure we double check our pieces before putting them together. If you accidentally install a piece on backwards, it could lead to your model not looking as good as it should. And with the armor collection having such great detail, it would be a real shame not to be able to show the whole thing off. The next symbol we have is the attention point, which we only encounter 1 time throughout this entire build. So let's go ahead and just take a look at that step together so we can understand what the instructions are trying to bring our attention to. It looks like the intention point is pointing to part 21's 3 different tabs at the top, showing that they are flat while the bottom ones are concave, and that when we connect it to part 22, it's very important that we put the concave ends on the bottom. I think if we installed this step backwards, our horse armor probably wouldn't work out, so if you're having a major problem with your main, you might want to go back to this step and see if you installed this part correctly. Now, going back to our instructions, the next 2 symbols we have are the circles and triangles, and these are everywhere throughout our instructions, but for good reason, because these symbols tell us how we're going to secure our parts together. Every time we see these blue circles, we want to make sure that we grab as much of the tab in our tweezers as possible and then bend them over 90 degrees, usually flat with the other piece. Every time we see these triangles, we want to grab as much of the tab in our tweezers as possible and then twist them 90 degrees. Now, groove builders, with this build and pretty much all other metal model builds, I definitely recommend following the instructions first, and then at the very end, once everything is together, go over your model and see if there's any tabs you want to change to make the model look better. I find if you start changing things as you go, things don't always turn out the best in the end. And the main reason for that is because some of these tabs are there and secured the way they are for structural integrity reasons or to prop up a certain position in the model. Moving right along to our right, we enter our tool section. And groove builders, they say recommended tools here, but personally, I think these are essential tools for building any metal model. The first tool we have is our wire cutters, which are very useful for getting into our metal sheets and cutting out all of our parts. Make sure you get as flush as you possibly can to the part, as you don't want to have any leftover burrs when you're putting your model together. These little leftover pieces of metal can get in the way of you putting things together, and they also don't look very good, so making sure you have a nice flush cut will make all the difference. The next tools that are recommended to us are tweezers and needle nose pliers. The tweezers are great for bending all of our small pieces, and also really good for getting all of our tabs and securing them in the proper way. The needle nose pliers are great for some of our longer pieces that we need to form, like our base, and they're also really useful for getting all those hard to reach tabs that our tweezers just can't get to. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're saying, Disorderly Cone, I know for a fact you're using other tools than just these three to build this model. And you're correct. I like to use a wide variety of tools to help me build all of my metal models, and I do actually plan to put a video out soon discussing all the tools and how to use them. But I really want to make sure I have a good variety of tools for that video, so just wait a little bit longer and I promise it'll be worth the wait. Now, with that being said, the tools that I'm using to help me build the horse armor that aren't listed on the instructions is my doming set, which are very useful for helping me build anything that's kind of slightly rounded. That silver pencil you see me using is a bending tool, and it's also very useful for grabbing all of our tabs and securing them very tightly to the model. This was actually my first time using this tool, and I absolutely love it. But before I feel comfortable recommending it to everybody out there, I really do want to use it in a few more builds. And finally, just below our tools, we have two pictures of our metal sheets. Now, the first thing I recommend doing is taking your metal sheets and orientating them to these two pictures. And the reason for that is that it makes it a lot easier for you to be able to find your parts when you need them. Looking a little bit closer at these two pictures, you might also see some color. Those colors represent duplicate parts, and it makes it a lot easier for us to be able to find them when we need them. And with that, groove builders, we're finished with our instructions. Is there anything you want to add, R2? I agree, R2, it does look really good. And one more build before C3PO. And there we go. We did it, groove builders. We built the Metal Earth horse armor. And I have to admit, this looks really nice with all of its laser etching and of course uniquely shaped detail. If you're looking to build this at home though, there are a few things you're going to want to know. Let's talk about those things in construction. My first point when it comes to building the Metal Earth horse armor is about this rear rump right here. You guys warned me on my Instagram that that might be a little bit tricky. Man, you know what? It probably is the trickiest part of the entire build to actually form. My suggestion for this back little part here is to go ahead and connect your tabs first. And then after connecting your tabs, making sure to put your tweezers on the actual tab locations themselves, begin to form the metal into its proper shape. Now, groovers, this will take a few times, and don't think you're going to get it perfect the first time. Once you're satisfied with the shape that you have with the rear, go ahead and move on to the next few steps. As you go, you'll be able to correct the rump, making it look really nice in the end. For my second point, I have a building tip for all you groove builders out there. And yes, it's one that I've mentioned here before, but with the horse armor, I found it particularly useful. Make sure to pre-bend all of your tabs before putting them into the insertion holes. You'll find yourself having a little bit of a hard time if you don't when you're trying to put the rump together and also this mane here at the top. So Groove Builders, pre-bend all of your tabs and save yourself the heartache. For my third and final point, I just want to warn all you builders out there that this metal in particular is very easy to crease in a place that you don't want it to. And that's because of all this laser etching detail that's all over it. Yes, it looks really nice, but that laser etching detail does weaken the metal. So anytime you're forming anything round, really make sure you take your time. And if you don't have a tool to help you get these surfaces, really try to use your thumb and go slow. Once you have a crease, you have a crease. And with that being said, Groove Builders, let's move on to build time. The Metal Earth horse armor took me just over 2.5 hours to build, with me taking a coffee break in between. The majority of my time was spent forming this mane right here, and of course trying to get the proper shape of this back. Now Groove Builders, it's never a race to get these things complete, and once you're done, you're done. So you really do want to make sure you take your time with this model and make sure you get all those proper details done correctly. You'll thank yourself in the end. And finally, Groove Builders, my thoughts. The Metal Earth horse armor was a very interesting and surprising build. You know, Groove Builders, I have a really good time building Metal Earth models because oftentimes I find them engineered extremely well. And lately, I've been building all different kinds of metal models from all different kinds of companies. And coming back to what I like to call the OG of metal model companies is always a pleasure. Now with this particular build, I found some of the metal to be a lot thinner than some of the other metal models we've been building lately, which I think is kind of interesting, because metal models to me, especially from Metal Earth, always typically are of a higher quality. Now I do believe it's just because of the metal having so many holes in it and of course the laser etching all over it, that's why that metal feels a little bit weaker than what I'm normally used to working with when it comes to Metal Earth. Now Groove Builders, that's not a cause of concern necessarily, but it is definitely something you're going to want to know if you're one of these builders out there who really enjoys having a pristine model. Now this build looks great amongst all of my other metal models, and that's why I can definitely recommend it for anyone out there who's looking to pick it up. But if you're new to metal model building, I would say maybe shelve this one for a little while, because there's definitely some pieces in here that might be a little bit too tricky for a new metal model builder. And with that, Groove Builders, we're at the end of our show. I had a really good time building the Metal Earth horse armor with you, and if you guys had a good time, don't forget to press that like button. For more videos like this, hit subscribe as well, as we got all kinds of really cool content coming out in the future. Until next time, Groove Builders, keep building. Hey, did you have a good time? Nay. I think that's a bad thing.